Really?
Yeah. Intoxicating History.
We're talking gangsters, spats, the Wild West, speakeasies, squirts out the butter,
Deck chairs on the Titanic.
Prohibition,
Moral panic.
human nature,
The American Dream. Richard III.
Queen Victoria,
The Church.
and that damn turkey,
My favourite Roman.
gaping holes.
Urinating in public.
Interesting characters.
Shove it up the horse's bum.
It will explode. The French. South Africa.
World War One.
Mechanised war.
All right, shoving it all in. The martini,
Grog.
champagne,
Beer.
wine.
People don't like wine that much, if I'm being absolutely honest with you.
The Navy, you got your tot of rum. That was a decent measure. The sailors ate very well, even the lowliest. You know, NC climbing up ships' masts and rum, bum and buggery, whatever. You know,
Rum, sodomy in the lash.
rum, sodomy in the lash. That took a lot of work. And so anyway, the 31st of July 1970, Black Tot Day, was the last day which the Royal Navy issued sailors with a daily rum ration. I still see to this day a thing Navy strength from. Is that stronger or weaker than normal rum?
That was stronger than normal, but I think it's about 57%. And basically, if it's stronger than 57%, if you mix it with gunpowder, it will explode.
Wow.
If it's weaker, it won't. A term for rum was grog.
Yeah, and we still use grog.
We still use grog to mean alcohol, and that comes from a chap called Admiral Vernon, who in 1740 introduced this thing which was watered down rum. So rather than having drinking rum neat and then all kinds of craziness happening, you drink rum watered down, and he was called Old Grogram. Which grogram was a type of kind of like tarpaulin type coat, like a waterproof.
Yeah.
So grog came from Old Grogram.
Oh.
And this was a sort of proto mojito.
Yeah.
So it would have been like water, rum, may have had some sugar, may have had lime juice in as well for the scurvy. So the mojito was invented for the Royal Navy. My favourite Roman.
Yeah, Mark Antony.
Mark Antony.
I mean, he was a proper old boozer, wasn't he?
And then there's stories about Antony urinating in public.
And then his
Top
drunken
Roman.
letters to the Roman public, the equivalent of the drunken email or text these days, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah.
Firing off 10 pages of beautifully written saying sort of, or like drawing pictures of his member and sort of posting them.
Posting in the forum.
Yes,
Maybe
the
like
forum.
scratching it on a pillar. He had a drinking club called the Inimitable Livers, which is funny because they didn't actually know that the liver processed alcohol.
Yeah.
He identified very deliberately with Bacchus, the god of wine. So there's a famous propaganda slogan that was used by Octavian, which I think this is kind of masterful. This is like something you can imagine from an American election or something. And it's like, Antony, friend to Bacchus, enemy to Rome.
Genius.
Because women weren't meant to drink. So there was a thing which I'm going to pronounce very badly. Ius Osculi, which apparently was called the right to kiss. And it was that a man would kiss the woman of the house. That could be the husband, it could be the father, it could be the uncle, to check that she hadn't been drinking. So he would kiss her and just see if there was any wine on her breath.
Gosh.
I don't think it was a lot of fun being a Roman woman. And this is a kind of theme of Roman history, isn't it? They're always worried about moral decay. They're always worried that the empire or the republic is going to be destroyed by women drinking.
He was the monk that invented champagne. So is that true?
No, it's propaganda put about by Big Champagne.
Is it?
So Dom Perignon was a real person, and he was making champagne. He was a monk, and he was very important in the history of champagne. So he kind of isolated grape varieties like Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. He was an expert on viticulture. He probably made some wonderful wines, but there's absolutely no evidence that he made sparkling wines. In fact, he probably would have considered a sparkling wine to be a fault and would have tried very hard to make sure it had finished fermenting before serving it. And all the stuff about him being blind and icy stars, all that sort of stuff, 19th century invention.
Oh, I loved all that. It was romantic, everything. Yeah, made all the better by Dom Perignon.
And I think people will go on saying it because it sells an awful lot of champagne and it's a wonderful story.
But the port, the ladies would go off and then the men would go down one side of the table, and if you passed it the wrong way, the port, it was always, you knew that, let me just get this right, that way.
It goes to the left.
Phew.
And the reason it goes to the left, there's a rather fun story is that by going to the left, it allows you to keep your sword arm free.
In case the French come again.
in order to protect yourself. And I can remember being in a private a lunch in London, actually, with Her Late Majesty, and it was a table with probably about 20 of us. And then I went on to tell the story of passing the port. And of course, passed it over, and it, of course, leaves your sword arm free to protect yourself and stop anyone stealing your glass of port. To which Her Majesty picked up her knife and went, swish, 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 swish. She said, yes, Your Majesty's got the idea. But there's this wonderful story about the Bishop of Norwich, because the port always goes to the left. So if somebody's arriving up next to someone and they're not passing it on, you can get the decanters stacking up. And the Bishop of Norwich apparently had a terrible habit of doing this, which was called sitting on the port. And so in order to sort of jolly along the movement of the port, the trick is you turn to someone and you say, do you know the Bishop of Norwich? And they go, why do you ask? You say, well, he was terribly bad at sitting on the port. They, oh my Lord, and they pass it on.
I mean, Christmas Carol is fascinating because Dickens, with Christmas, he was probably, along with Victoria and Albert, were the two people who popularised, because Christmas before was this wonderful sort of bacchanal of, I think it was 12 days of Twilight of Christmas, where everyone would leave work and, just get absolutely blind drunk. It very much wasn't a religious affair. It was absolutely sort of drunken, and and of course the employers, as the Industrial Revolution came on, did not like the idea of this 12 days of Christmas because they lost 12 essential days. So religion was brought in. That damn turkey was brought in, which Dickens has a lot to answer for, because goose and beef we would have had before, but of course this very rare turkey that they get on Christmas Day with ever annoying Tiny Tim. You sort of sometimes wish that.
An awful lot of our tastes don't reflect our individual preferences. Okay, I think a lot of people don't like wine that much, if I'm being absolutely honest with you. There are large numbers of things in the food and drink industry which are effectively sort of imposed social norms. When you go to a restaurant, you are unbelievably pressured to drink wine as opposed to any other drink.
Yes, I saw that, yes.
Yeah, so there are wine glasses already on the table. In fact, if you say we're not having any wine, they take them away with a bit of a huff, and you're immediately branded second-class citizen. They hand a wine list to one person. If you think about it, if you're choosing for a whole table, there are only about 4 drinks that are shareable. There's red wine, there's white wine, there are tequila slammers, okay, and Pimm's, I guess. Wine without food is actually an appalling drink, and it's a terrible habit that British people have got into. And Kingsley Amis, I think, famously said that the worst 3 words in the English language are red or white.
Hitler's eagle's nest was the top of a mountain. It was where all the great pictures, tapestries, antiques, and wine, hundreds of thousands of bottles of the best wine on earth.
Well, there was a race, wasn't there? Because the Americans wanted to get there first.
To put their flag up. But the French,
the French got there. The French basically went round all the fighting and got there really fast.
And what he found there, it is the great wet dream of anyone who's ever had a sip of French wine ever.
These Germans, knowing nothing, had just piled up everything. The greatest wines in the world and, Vino Blanco.
How would you get out millions of bottles of wine out from the top of a mountain? Well, they lowered it down on ropes, and then the medical corps came and put them on stretchers. They were so good with bodies and so careful, and these wines are just as important, if not more, than injured men. So they were taken down the mountain on stretchers, case after case after case after case.
Where does the word cocktail come from?
Well, there's quite a debate about that, as there is with a lot of drinks-related things, partly because I think no one can quite remember what was going on at
That's
the
the
time.
thing about drinks history, isn't it?
Yes.
Everyone was drinking.
The word itself, cocktail, There are lots of theories, you know, the French word cocktail, which is an egg cup. But the front runner for cocktail relates to a practice in the 18th century in horse trading, where people would take an old nag to market, and in order to make it sort of prance around and look more lively than it actually was, they would take a piece of ginger and shove it up the horse's bum.
My
and
God.
this would make its eyes sparkle and its tail.
That's a sharp little and a half, isn't it?
We see the first sort of cocktails made of spirits and sort of herbal, spicy, medicinal elixirs emerging around the sort of late 1700s, early 1800s. And you get these whole families of morning drinks because they were sort of improvers to be drunk in the mornings. You have eye openers and fog cutters and phlegm drivers. Sure. And, you know, it was something that you had at the beginning of the day to set you up.
But there were also some really bizarre loopholes that I've never really understood. So to appease the Italian vote, the Italians were allowed to make wine. That was not illegal. Bourbon and Scotch could be sold medicinally. So you could get a prescription from your doctor for a pint of Lefroy. The Yale Club bought enough booze to last 14 years.
That must have been a hell of a lot of booze.
Yeah, and then the church, they obviously had to have...
As a Catholic, you have to have bloody
You have to have wine.
This reminds me of lockdown rules, you know, this were great gaping holes, you know, you have to be out, you know, you can only eat till 10 o'clock at night because the virus just, you know, only comes out at night. And if your name begins with P and ends with L, then at 2 o'clock in the morning, you're allowed to walk 2 meters across the park. It seems this law was created in haste. This is something that, just like art with wine, as long as there are things worth money, there are going to be people who are going to counterfeit it to make more money.
In medieval Germany, those caught selling fake wine could face branding, beatings, or even execution by hanging. So, you know, in medieval Germany, they took it very, very seriously. We're going to come on to some of the best wine frauds of recent years. It was the so-called antifreeze scandal.
I do sort of remember
And
that,
I remember it
yeah.
on the news. Austria was making tons of really low-quality wine to sell to the Germans.
Yes.
And lots of it. And they were adding something called diethylene glycol to make the wine taste sweeter, which isn't quite the same as antifreeze.
Which does make you go blind.
Which does make you go blind. So the wines were poisonous, but not that poisonous. And I don't think anyone actually died from the antifreeze thing, unlike in Italy, where they had the methanol scandal.
Because methanol is obviously a cheap ingredient, isn't it? And
yeah, well, it's just sort of bad alcohol. You know, ethanol is the good alcohol. Methanol, it's the kind of stuff that makes you go blind.
And of course, Italy being Italy, it didn't really dent sales at all, did it?
No, it didn't affect it at all. So you had a wine scandal in Italy where people were actually dying.
Yeah.
And people carried on buying Chianti and Lambrusco and stuff. And you have one in Austria, destroyed the industry. The French insisted that they go up the western side of the Rhone because that's where the best vineyards are, and so that they didn't destroy them. The thing that the French were terrified of was mechanized war amongst the Grand Crus. What could be worse?
And I love the idea the Americans think, what the hell's going on here? They're going slow. What's this? Why are they slowing this down? We're supposed to be moving through. But no, the French, with their priorities in exactly the right place, I hasten to add, saying, you know, we're not having this World War I nonsense again. You know, we're going to make sure. And then what was that wonderful quote we talked about earlier?
Mon colonel, we have found the weak spot in the German defenses. Everyone is on a vineyard of inferior quality.
It is the martini, isn't it? Shaken, not stirred.
If you talk to a bartender, they always say, Fleming was an idiot. You should always have it stirred, don't have it shaken. And the thing about shaking it is you get lots of little bits of ice in it.
Yeah.
So when you pour it, it might be cloudy. It'll be slightly cloudy, only for a bit, and then they'll melt. And also it will be diluted. So there's two schools of thought here. One is that Fleming was an idiot and he didn't know what he was talking about.
Yeah.
Number two is that actually he really did know what he was talking about, and Bond wanted his martinis slightly weaker, so you have a little bit more water in, so it's more diluted. Or the third one is, I was watching your least favourite, Daniel Craig, and I made just a vodka martini, not a Vespa. And I shook it, and it was absolutely delicious.
Here we are making history here now, saying that Bond isn't an idiot and Fleming isn't an idiot for having his martini shaken, not stirred. Bond got it right. He
Yeah.
really knew how to do it.